Great time.
Good on you. Kia ora. Thank you for joining us. Leonie, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks very much, and look forward to hopefully doing it in the studio next time.
Yes, indoors. Well, we are all indoors. That's it from us. Lisa Owen with Checkpoint next. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, the COVID tail swats Auckland hard. New community cases jumped to 45 today. So what does that mean for level 3? We'll speak to the COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins. MIQ's described as a lottery in human misery as National reveals its plan to reintroduce Aotearoa to the rest of the world. So how long can the government restrict people coming home to New Zealand? We get some legal advice. Auckland border busters hit the accelerator and leave lockdown in the rear view mirror. Advocates slam a new OT report saying transformative, it's not enough, and still no haircuts for their masters, but we meet the poochers hopping back in the chair for a tidy up.
Ahi Māori e RNZ News at 5, ko Sarah Thompson tōko ingoa. The COVID-19 response minister is urging the country to hold its nerve, saying the government still wants to run Auckland's Delta outbreak into the ground. There are 45 new community cases today, 12 of them unlinked. Chris Hipkins says the numbers are sobering, but many of the cases were expected as they are household or known close contacts.
We have seen blips already in this outbreak where we've had a bad day, where we've had a larger number of cases and then it's gone down again. So I would encourage people not to read too much into it at this point. You know, I think we've still got to hold our nerve here, and we are still, pursuing COVID-19. We're still aiming to run this into the ground.
Chris Hipkins says many of the cases in the outbreak come from large households, which means there will be higher numbers of cases. A high-ranking police officer and inspector is being investigated for crossing the Auckland boundary without an exemption to attend a burial. Auckland is currently at alert level 3 and restrictions relating to essential travel remain in place. Kate Gregan reports.
A police spokesperson says the reported incident is very concerning. RNZ has asked police for further details. They have not answered questions about the officer's rank or age, which district is responsible for investigating, whether or not charges may be laid, or whether or not the inspector was allowed to travel beyond the border. The Independent Police Conduct Authority has been notified. Meanwhile, 4 people have been charged in the Auckland and Upper Hauraki areas since Alert Level 3 came into place for not complying with COVID-19 orders.
And the Navy is investigating after a junior sailor breached Auckland's lockdown boundary to attend a close family member's funeral last weekend. They have been told to isolate at their rural Hawke's Bay property and get a COVID-19 test. A Tauranga health boss is satisfied with the number of people who've turned out to get tested after COVID-19 was detected in wastewater last week. Results from a further test carried out yesterday will be released tomorrow. Western Bay Primary Health Organisation Chief Executive Lindsay Webber is happy with the 350 tests done today.
We're probably seeing less symptomatic patients now that we're coming into springtime. So we're seeing less of those sort of winter respiratory illnesses. But having said that, I think most people are listening to the instructions and are attending for testing if they have any symptoms.
Lindsay Webber says health providers are on standby to rev up testing if needed. A report into Oranga Tamariki is being described as not going far enough to prompt transformational change, and the minister is promising to enforce. The government-appointed advisory panel has found Oranga Tamariki is not fit for purpose and it lacks vision and strategy. Marnie Dunlop reports.
Advocates describe the report as weak and tinkering and putting more money into strategies is not the answer. National Urban Māori Authority Chair Lady Sureti Moxon says the report and its recommendations are on the right track, but it is a missed opportunity to be bold. The advisory panel has 3 overarching recommendations, including a strategy to better partner with Māori, that the agency's purpose is clarified, and to appoint a governance board to oversee the changes. The Minister Minister for Children, Calvin Davis, says he will force change, which he expects to happen in 3 to 5 years.
People have threatened to boycott a Central Otago business over its offer to provide free entry to people with a COVID-19 vaccine during the school holidays. Highlands Motorsport Park in Cromwell will waive the $30 entry fee to its museum for vaccinated people and accompanying children. Chief Executive Jodie Spillin says the vitriol directed towards her and her staff over the offer was a shock.
We accept that vaccination is a personal choice. We were shocked by the viciousness and the really ill-informed viewpoints that people have posted and emailed us about, and that's really shocked us.
Josie Spillin says the offer is a way to thank those who have had the vaccine. It's 5:04. Moving now into sports news, the 3 Auckland-based NPC rugby teams have been cleared to resume training in a restricted capacity. New Zealand Rugby has confirmed the Auckland, North Harbour and Counties Manukau squads will return to supervised aerobic sessions. Groups are restricted to 10 people, while training must also be no more than an hour in duration, contactless and with no sharing of equipment allowed. All players and staff have been tested. NZR says the teams will return to competition once Auckland moves down to Alert Level 2. Benji Marshall says any talk about this weekend's NRL Grand Final being his rugby league swan song is premature. The 36-year-old is back in the decider with South Sydney 16 years after leading the Tigers to the 2005 title. Rabbitohs coach Wayne Bennett has predicted Sunday's final against the Panthers will be Marshall's last NRL match, but Marshall is not so sure.
I think I've done a really good job in the last few years of just playing each game as if it's my last, and then at the end of the season make a decision about what I want to do, and it's not going to be any different this year. Put it this way, I feel like the way my body feels right now, I could play next year for sure if I wanted to. Probably give after this weekend a bit of time to sink in and make a decision after that.
And that's the news.
Lockdown holidays aren't child's play.
This is going to be really different to how things normally are. So there might be some kind of trepidation about how the holidays are going to go.
The Taki's back an anti-lockdown march.
This is just grossly irresponsible stuff. It's false, it's misleading, and it's dangerous.
And finally, the latest Bond film comes out.
Well, listen, a year ago this just felt like a dream. I mean, we weren't counting on this at all.
It's Report, Morning Report. Weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rapare Thursday. In the west, from Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Peninsula and the central high country, fine spells and a few showers, then a period of rain spreading north tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast to Wellington, also Marlborough, mainly fine tonight with showers spreading north tomorrow. Nelson will be fine apart from isolated showers tonight and tomorrow afternoon. Bulla in Westland will see periods of rain clearing tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, except for Clutha, will see showers spreading north this afternoon and evening, clearing to fine tomorrow. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland will see showers and snow to 500 metres tonight and early tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain and fine spells. Southwest gales for a time this afternoon and evening. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rapare Thursday. It's 5:07.
Nā mihi, Sarah, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Delta tail is stinging Auckland hard, with 45 new cases in the community today. It's less than a week till Cabinet reviews alert level settings for the super city and the rest of the country, with case numbers continuing to yo-yo. Some experts have described Auckland as a city on a knife edge, warning people a downward shift in levels is not a given. But the Director General of Health said today the surge in infections wasn't unexpected, pointing again to 3 active subclusters. Meanwhile, the government's announced further details of its managed isolation trial for business, hours after National revealed its alternative plan for opening New Zealand up to the rest of the world. Given today's big numbers, I asked COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins if Level 2 is still possible for Auckland next week.
Yes, it is. We've always said that our goal is to step down step down restrictions as it's safe to do so. The fact that we've seen a big number of cases today, I certainly understand that will have people a bit spooked, but it's more important to look underneath the bigger number and say, what are those cases all about? What are they made up of? And the fact that we've got a relatively small number at this point where we haven't identified the linkages, where we know that the majority of them are household or close contacts of other known cases and therefore already isolating, that means that the big number itself isn't quite as daunting as it might otherwise be.
The Director General of Health has talked about several active subclusters, right? He mentioned yesterday 2 of the subclusters are groups of linked households. These are his words. They've got a connection. Obviously, people have been moving between these households. So are people breaking the rules?
Look, there can be some rule breaches, but sometimes there are legitimate reasons even at level 3, for households to be in contact with one another. And so, I don't want to, cast aspersions on these households unfairly.
OK, but we know from the Director General of Health that these are active subclusters, and he's indicated they're mixing. So why are they mixing? Is there a legitimate reason for mixing or not?
Like I said, I don't want to get into the details of sharing.
Do you know the detail, Minister, but you just don't want to make it public?
No, to be fair, I don't know all of the information about the reasons that they've come into contact with one another. I do know that there are, some legitimate reasons at level 3 for people to still be in contact with other people. And yes, it is possible. So I certainly wouldn't say that it hasn't happened. That some of the people have been coming into contact despite the rules.
Are these high case numbers? Is that the trickle down, the consequences of going to level 3?
No, not at all. I think it's likely that we could have still seen a number this high, given the overall makeup of the group that we're talking about. It's possible that we still could have seen quite a high number even at alert level 4.
You've released some more details of the self-isolation trial for business. What exactly is this trial, this pilot, going to tell you that you need to know to go ahead on a wider scale?
We need to test all of the systems to make sure we've got systems that work. We've got to make sure that we fully understand, the technology, all of the different systems that are going to need to be required as we do this at a larger scale.
But isn't that basic stuff, right? Because what you've laid out is the rules today. They've got to be at a standalone house, no more than 50 k's from Christchurch or Auckland, provide your own food, pay $1,000, have a pre-departure check and subject yourself to basically some kind of GPS tracking and an application to identify you. It doesn't seem that hard. Why can't more people be doing it?
Well, if I flip that around, Lisa, and we had this conversation 18 months ago, let's pretend we had this conversation 18 months ago, the notion of putting people in hotels for 2 weeks and testing them, regularly and then releasing them when they were COVID-free, that seems pretty straightforward and simple as well on the surface of it. And then when you get underneath it, there's a heck of a lot of complexity there, as our experience over the last year and a half has clearly demonstrated.
Will anyone else be able to self-isolate at home before Christmas?
I wouldn't rule that out, although I don't think that's likely to happen on a large scale this side of Christmas.
So not on a large scale, but what kind of scale could be possible before Christmas?
Look, we will see. The commitment that I have made and that the government has made is that we're not going to be waiting until this pilot is over to capture the lessons from it and consider how we factor that into a scaling up of this approach. And so if the lessons early on are favourable, if we think that we can do more, then we would look to do more. We wouldn't be waiting until it's all over before making those decisions. But I don't want to pre-commit that. There's still a lot of work to do here.
But you are offering a glimmer of hope that there might be an expansion of this prior to Christmas if the real-time results are positive.
Oh, look, I don't want to oversell that, but what I do want to say is that we are acutely aware that we've got a lot of people who want to come into the country, and of course we want to find ways for them to do that safely as quickly as we can. But I don't want to raise expectations without an ability to be able to meet them.
So you're expanding MIQ because there is, as you say, a lot of demand. A Christchurch hotel only adding another 85 beds. Are purpose-built facilities still under active consideration?
I think as we look to the next couple of years of our response to COVID-19, I think we're likely to see a changing nature in what we expect of MIQ. So as we see more people self-isolating on return, for example, it's likely that the MIQ's work is more likely to be focused at the quarantine end, i.e. dealing with people with COVID, rather than the isolating end, which is, making sure people don't have COVID. And so that does mean that we would need to look at the overall makeup of the facilities that we've got.
So you're saying you don't need purpose-built facilities?
No, actually, because when we're talking about quarantine, those are the biggest risk areas, and so it may well be that we have a smaller number of beds available, number of rooms available, but that they are more specialist.
In terms of the level change or review next week in Auckland, is it true that you're considering the prospect of more freedoms within Auckland, but not allowing people to travel over the border still?
Look, again, I don't want to get in front of decisions that haven't yet been taken, because we always want to make decisions on the most up-to-date information possible, and there's still several days to go before we're having to make decisions about that. But we have in the past stepped down through alert levels, so not immediately overnight gone from, say, level 3 to level 2, but started to ease restrictions on a pathway to something, and I hope next week would be able to be in a position to set out what that might look like and what kind of timetable that would be over.
So, Minister, it's possible we might transition into level 2 in Auckland by having a period of more freedom within Auckland but no travel outside of the border for some time, and then move down to level 2. That's a possibility.
It's certainly a possibility. I certainly wouldn't discount that as a real possibility.
If the super city is still, super restricted, with kids in holiday mode from next week, are you going to allow them to potentially expand their bubble just a little bit so that they can have a buddy during the school holidays?
Oh, look, there's still a bit of water to flow under the bridge there in terms of where we're at with alert levels and what the overall level of risk is. And we'll know even more than we do now in a couple of days' time.
And that's COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins. It is 5:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai e haere ake nei. Coming up, the other Chris, Bishop that is, on National's COVID plan, opening the borders and allowing Kiwis to fly without isolation. Hundreds of people have been allowed to bust through the Auckland boundary today and leave lockdown behind. People can finally leave Tamaki Makaurau if they're moving permanently or heading to uni accommodation. Cross-border shared caregiving setups are also back on the cards. Reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe spoke to some of those breaking free.
You've got a great collection, haven't you? Cool. Hey, man, I'm happy with that. That checks out. So, and you've had your COVID test as well.
I've had the COVID. I'm double vaccinated. Cool. I've got that too.
Diane Martin is free at last. The long-lost South Islander has been given the green light to bust through Auckland's southern border, leaving lockdown in the rear-view mirror. She's armed with her documents of deliverance, resignation letter, check, ferry ticket, check, proof of new address, check, and don't forget that all-important negative test.
I am driving to Wellington now, and I'm going to hang out for a while with my nephew in Otaki, and then I'm catching a 2 a.m. ferry from Wellington to Picton, and I am driving to my new home in Nelson.
And so Diane's road trip is about to begin, and boy, it's a biggie, but it pales in comparison to the journey to this point.
Yeah, it's been a real journey. For the past I'm a Kiwi, but came back 4 years ago after 40 plus years in the US. I've been blessed for the last 2.5 years. I've been a resident manager of a storage facility where I live on site. I have decided to retire. It was my birthday yesterday, and I'm going back to my hometown of Nelson.
Now it's time to wind down that window, turn up the music, breathe in that fresh country air, enjoy the trip.
Yeah, just seeing country and cows and, getting out of Auckland, I'm starting to feel good.
And Diane's not alone. The Mercer roadblock is far busier today. Officers wave cars up the line, meticulously questioning drivers and their passengers. It's easy to spot those free to move house from today, their cars packed with bags and bedding.
It's moving day on Auckland's southern boundary. Some are relocating, others are going home from level 3 back to level 2. Children are being reunited with parents, and for some making the move today, the emotion is too much.
Sorry, it's been a long time. We've been we're due to move 2 days after we went into the first lockdown, so it's been
a long time coming.
It's been a long time coming.
This woman struggles to keep it together as she talks of how much it means to be able to escape Auckland's lockdown.
I'm going to be in tears when I drive off, so that's how much. Yep.
The family had been due to move over 6 weeks ago before Delta doomed those plans.
We've just been sitting in our house half packed, and we were able to settle with the people who bought our house, but we're still, it's been hard.
This is the harsh reality of another COVID-19 lockdown. Until now, many desperate to start the next chapter of their lives haven't been able to.
Well, thank you for that.
Perfect.
Safe travels.
Have a lovely day.
Another mover pulls up to the Mercer checkpoint in her hired van. It's packed with tables, chairs, plants, you name it. It's there.
I was actually going to relocate. I've gotten a new job and the lockdown was announced that morning that I was meant to leave. So I've been boxed sort of sitting around my room waiting to go.
Finally, she's on the road after 6 weeks of stop-start.
Definitely relieved. I mean, with the level 3 being announced, I was like, oh sweet, finally can go. And then it was like, no, it can't go. So it's third time lucky I can finally go. It's very exciting, yeah, for sure.
Vehicles trickle back onto State Highway 1. Next stop, the Tron, and a taste of freedom.
If you were listening to that story on radio, we'll put the video from our two nicks up on our Facebook page so you can check it out. It is 5:20. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A lottery in human misery is how Nationals describe the MIQ system, and it reckons quarantine-free travel by Christmas is possible under its plan to open the borders. Once vaccination rates hit 85%, it would start reopening to the world. Vaccinated returnees from low-risk areas would need COVID tests pre-departure and arrival, and if all clear, would be free to enter Aotearoa without having to isolate. There'd be 7 days isolation at home for those coming from medium risk locations, and travellers from red zones would head to managed isolation for 14 days. Well, joining us now is National's COVID response spokesperson, Chris Bishop. Hi, Chris. Can you just talk us through how would you decide on the risk profiles of the country and what levels of vaccination would be required for this sort of travel?
Sure. So we've got two particular triggers. For low-risk travel, we're looking at countries or jurisdictions where there is either no COVID, like the Cooks, for example, or there's low levels of COVID. So a state in Australia like Queensland, for example, and where you've got a very high vaccination rate. So we've set 80% for that target. So Queensland will be at 80% soon. They've got very low levels of COVID. We would say at that point, double vaccinated Kiwi travellers can jump on a plane with a pre-departure test and a test on arrival here in New Zealand as well, and as long as they both clear negative, they can come into the community. For the medium risk pathway, we're looking at countries where, something like the UK or the US, where COVID is manageable, but it's in the community and it's not a low level, and we would take advice from the public health experts as to exactly what, in the community and manageable means.
Do you have any idea of how many people would be coming back and forth over our borders in these scenarios?
I mean, no, because it's just impossible to estimate that. Some people don't want to travel. I mean, you saw when the bubble opened, there was an initial burst and then the numbers fell away a little bit. And, you just don't know how many Kiwis in the UK, for example, would want to come home. Lots would want to come home for Christmas, obviously. There'd be far fewer probably in, sort of February, March, in the middle months in the UK summer and the New Zealand winter. So it's just impossible to know. But the point is that there'd be quite a lot. There's no doubt about that. And that's part of the policy, is to make sure that, people in London and in other parts of the States and in Australia can come home, because the MIQ system is just a disaster. It's an exercise in human misery, and we need to fix it.
Your cell phone's just sort of a bit crackly there, so if I can just get you to move around a bit and just so we can hear you. How many hospitalisations and deaths would come with this plan of yours?
We're very confident that COVID will enter New Zealand, and it's worth remembering that COVID is here right now, another 45 cases today. It's impossible to reopen the borders without having COVID at a low level in the community. But we've outlined 10 things that we think the government should be doing to manage COVID in the community, things like contact tracing, saliva testing, making use of rapid antigen testing, a whole range of different measures, and of course purpose-built quarantine as well, to keep COVID at a low level, and that doesn't impact unduly on the public health system.
So what do you consider to be a low level? How many cases a day?
Well, I think cases around the 50 mark would be a low level, and at that level, 50 to maybe a few more than that, at that level you can cope with COVID in the community and make sure that it's dealt with through the system, and that you contact trace and isolate people who have COVID.
So have you modelled for that's the number of cases you will get in this scenario, or are you guessing at that?
It's literally impossible to build a model that builds in all the various variables. What we've pointed to in our paper is 3 particular models that are public. One of them is the Hendy model, one of them is the Van Nguyen model, which is the ESR modelling, and the other is the Doherty Institute modelling. They all show different things. The take-home point is that vaccination is the key. If you look at the Doherty Institute from Australia modelling, for example, they show that...
Can I just, interrupt you there, Chris? Let's look at Hendy's modelling, because that's for New Zealand, right? And at 85% vaccination rate with health practices like masks and a full contact tracing system, that still puts hospitalisations at 36,000 a year and potential deaths around 4,300, and that's with a mid-range efficacy for vaccination levels. So, I mean, would you be comfortable with that if that's what your plan resulted in?
No, because that's not what we're proposing. We're proposing ubiquitous rapid antigen tests. So anyone who wanted a rapid test could go out and get one. We're proposing a massive expansion of saliva testing for surveillance purposes. We're proposing a massive supercharged vaccination plan, for example. We're proposing use of COVID treatments that we currently don't have access to in New Zealand that we should be ordering and buying. So all of the things, some of the things we're proposing are in the Hendy model, but a lot are not, and so that's why we think it's not relevant to look at the Hendy modelling. And it's also worth bearing in mind that a lot of people disagree with Sean Hendy's modelling as well, including
a lot of people agree with it too. So what increased hospital capacity?
Even the Prime Minister says that models are a tool and a guide only. They're not a predetermination of what will happen. And it's also worth bearing in mind that the government, at least on paper, says they're committed to reopening to the world as well. And we're yet to hear from them what their plan is.
I'm wanting to focus on your plan. I'm wanting you to use the time to talk about your plan. So what increased hospital capacity exactly will you need if you implement this model? How many more ICU beds, how many more doctors, what exact resources will you need to counter the flow-on effects of this open border policy?
Well, it's impossible to state that with any specificity. What we've done in the paper is...
And that's your problem, isn't it?
No, I don't believe it is a problem. We are confident that with the tools and the measures outlined in our plan, we can keep COVID manageable in the community, and we've also outlined, and there will be cases that end up in hospital, but we've also outlined a plan to urgently increase the number of nurses and doctors in ICU, for example, through the immigration system, and that's part of the plan as well. So it's a very comprehensive, well thought through plan that I think that people, if they go and read it, can get behind.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That's National's COVID response spokesperson Chris Bishop. Homai o whakaro, really keen for your feedback on this one. Nō reire ānei nā kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Do you think that is workable? Would you support this proposal? It's basically 3 stages, low-risk countries, medium and high, and they're saying possible to get Kiwis returning to New Zealand isolation-free from low-risk countries by Christmas time. Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The government is set to expedite thousands of residence visa applications, RNZ understands. Thousands of existing migrants who want to settle in New Zealand permanently have been waiting months for their residency applications to be processed. Our political reporter Katie Scotcher has the details and joins us now from our Parliament studio. Kia ora, Katie, what's happening?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, the government's been under a heap of pressure to address this situation for some time. There is a major backlog of residence visa applications, some dating back to the end of 2019, and there's been an exodus of highly skilled staff, including doctors and nurses, in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic because of a pause that the government put on applications for skilled migrant residence visas in March last year. Now, I understand that the Minister will tomorrow announce that the government will expedite thousands of residence visa applications, but the finer details, including eligibility criteria, are not yet clear. But I do know that to be eligible for this, you do have to be in New Zealand and on a valid visa. Now, it appears that the government is also creating a one-off residence visa for migrant workers too. Now, this was discovered after Immigration New Zealand mistakenly posted the information about this visa on its website, and it was spotted by National's Erica Stanford before it was deleted, and we have confirmed that that visa will be announced tomorrow. But the devil will be in the detail with that one. We don't know if it will cover people on post-study work visas, working holiday visas, and what other criteria, including how long you have to have lived in New Zealand for, and any other skills and languages if they're required too. Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy is set to announce all those details tomorrow morning.
Katie, the lockdown in Auckland has prevented Immigration New Zealand from processing applications. I mean, how are they going to cope with a new visa?
Who knows? There are thousands of applications for this new visa are expected, possibly up to 100,000. And as you mentioned, the lockdown in Auckland has prevented Immigration New Zealand from processing the paper residence visa applications because they can't access those applications from home. So the government needs to find a solution here because it can't let the problem get any worse when they open up applications for this new visa. National's Erica Stanford says the government needs to drastically increase immigration's resourcing to ensure that they can handle these applications when they open. She also wants the government to give applicants some certainty around the speed that they'll be processed. She says they can't be waiting 5 or 6 years to get an answer as to whether or not it'll be approved. The government is expected to shed more light on that tomorrow.
Thanks, Katie. That is Katie Scotcher, our political reporter, joining us from Wellington there on, it seems the government's set to speed up residence applications and the details will be revealed tomorrow. While humans are still waiting for their trims and regrowth touch-ups, I hear ya, hallelujah, in Alert Level 3, Auckland pet groomers are back in action. 5 weeks in Level 4 has left groomers with a backlog of poochers desperate for their overdue pamper. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi filed this report.
At Groom Room Dog Grooming in Onehunga, Alexandra Holavkor is working through a month's backlog of dogs. As she works alone, it's a big challenge.
The whole week and as I mentioned, Saturday and Sunday, I've been here all days working really crazy to catch up.
When alert levels dropped last week, the mayhem began.
My phone was ringing all the time. People were calling and texting, and this was absolutely crazy. Everyone wanted an appointment just now. It was the same day.
And with the warmer months approaching, she's desperately trying to catch up and squeeze other clients in, but it'll still be a month at least before they'll get an appointment.
So some people, they don't want to book because they don't want to wait so long. But then they come back anyway because everyone is busy and they just can't find anywhere else earlier. So I don't think there will be time to have some rest. Probably we will be all groomers really busy until the end of the year.
And if you're wondering why poochers can get a trim while we can't,
the owners don't brush them at home, and the tangles are very painful for the skin because they pull the skin each time the dog is just rubbing on whatever. So that's why we just need to get rid of them and make sure the coat is in nice shape.
Making sure they don't reach that point are Schnauzer sisters Bella and Bailey, who are getting a full groom, the works. Under Alert Level 3, there are strict rules to follow to keep things contactless.
There's a crate, and the owner comes in, put the dog in the crate and just step back 2 meters, and then we can have a quick chat. But I also prefer if they text me or call me saying what they want, what kind of groom. When the dog is ready, I just text the owner, text my bank account, because there is also no FPOS, and they come pick up the dog from the crate. And after that, I have to clean everything, sanitize the table, the bath, every tool I use, scissors, clippers, comb.
After the grooming process is over, the fur-coated room highlights by Alexandra is thankful they're counted as an essential business.
This is from 2 little puppies who were just overdue 2 weeks. So in terms like why dogs need regular grooming, this is the answer. Basically, there are a lot of hair and they feel the heat. So yeah, and I felt that back then. Yes.
2 hours later, and a little lighter, Bella and Bailey are ready to go home, all set for the warmer months ahead and looking their best. For Alexandra, it'll take a few weeks of overtime before she can return to some sort of business as usual.
And you can check out the video for that story on our webpage. Some cute dogs in that piece from Marika and Louise. And the boss is wondering, if the dog can get a haircut, why can't he? Kia ora e te iwi, haere aki nei I a checkpoint. Some expats believe their rights are being forgotten because they can't return home. We test the law. What about no vax, no leave the Auckland boundary? We'll take that one to the streets too. And more on National's plan to reintroduce Aotearoa to the rest of the world. Homai o whakaaro, we'd love to hear your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme tonight, whether it's the alternative plan to open up our borders or the self-isolation trial for business. Get in touch, text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Anea Sarah Mina Pita Pita Kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ News headlines, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The government says it's still possible for Auckland to drop to Alert Level 2 next week, despite a large uptick in COVID-19 cases. The Director-General of Health confirmed 45 new community cases today, up from 8 yesterday. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins has told Checkpoint the figures will have people spooked, but the majority of cases were linked to other positive household contacts. He says the government has previously relaxed restrictions progressively rather than moved alert levels overnight, and that could be the case next week. Cabinet will make that decision next Monday. And Mr Hipkins says it's possible a larger number of people might be able to self-isolate at home before Christmas as it runs its pilot program to test the option other than staying in managed isolation. Applications will open tomorrow for the pilot of up to 150 double vaccinated people travelling overseas for business being allowed to isolate at home upon their return. Chris Hipkins says nothing will be ruled out as the pilot progresses, but it's unlikely it will be scaled up dramatically before the holidays. But he says if the lessons early on are favourable and they can do more, they will. The Police Minister says it is disappointing an inspector is under investigation for crossing the Auckland boundary, apparently without an exemption, to attend a burial. Auckland is currently at Alert Level 3 and restrictions relating to essential travel remain in place. Portal Williams says she has been briefed. An officer is under investigation, possibly helping people cross the boundary, and it appears to be an isolated case. And finally, police say one person has been taken to hospital in a serious condition following a multi-vehicle crash near the intersection of Queen Street and Customs Street in central Auckland this afternoon. Early indications are that the person suffered a medical event and then hit 2 other vehicles. Those are your headlines. Our next news and sport update is at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa in Nai ko Nona Peltier is here to talk business. Let's start with the Warehouse Group, Nona. It's posted a full year profit with strong sales and tighter cost controls. What did it make?
It made $117.7 million. That's twice what they made last year, although last year's result was affected by the repayment of a wage subsidy they received. That was a $68 million repayment that they made in that case. All of their brands recorded strong growth, and that was partly because of improvement in their gross margin, and that's the profit margin that they make on their products. Part of that was less old inventory that they were holding, so less sales items, discounted items, that sort of thing. And overall, just a strong pent-up demand after the lockdown. So what the company has done this time around, rather than apply for a wage subsidy, is that they've continued to pay their staff who are affected by the lockdown their full wages until the end of this month at least. And on top of that, gave them bonuses. So full-time employees got a $1,000 bonus, and part-time $500. The company is also looking to pay their shareholders a final dividend of 17.5 cents per share, but that's dependent on us moving out of, at least down to level 2 at some point, rather than staying here at level 3. So we'll see how that shakes out. But anyways, the market liked that. It rose their share price 1.7%.
And what's going on with the local manufacturer Raycon?
Yeah, some people might not be familiar with this particular company, but they make computer chips, and their fortunes have been, I'd like to say the chips have been down for this company for some time. And but look, things are turning around. So let's just see how much it's turning around. Last year, they made a net profit of $9.6 million, and that's for the year to end of June. Okay, so that's only just a few months ago. Then they came and they said, well, because there had been a fire in one of the largest chip manufacturing plants in the world. It's called AKM in Japan. That caused extensive damage and shortages of these chips that people use for all kinds of technology products and so on. So they then said that their profit might be between $27 million and $32 million. And that sounds pretty good. But today they've come out and said that profit guidance, has been raised to $12 million. So now they're expecting to make between $39 and $44 million. Now you compare that to what they made to the year to June, 9.6. That's a big gain. So the market's certainly like that, and I think their shareholders, should I say long-suffering shareholders, would have been thrilled because that share price rose 15% today. And so I think at one stage it was down like to 20 cents. So big deal for the Raycon shareholders today.
No, shall we take an orderly stroll around the market numbers?
If that's possible, Lisa, I can tell you their market has been in turmoil today. I mean, we saw the 3 U.S. stock indexes, they slid nearly 2% or more overnight. And that's because of concerns about potential interest rate hikes, well, you name it. And then, of course, the Asian markets lost ground again today because they were tracking the declines on Wall Street. And anyway, the U.S. dollar is at its strongest level it's been in a year. So, wow, lots of volatility there. And you see that in our market. We fell again 0.4% today. That was a 55-point drop to 13,120. And our dollar, it dropped, which you would expect because of the strength of the U.S. dollar, to 69.5 U.S. cents. 95.8 Australian, but pretty steady against the pence at 51.3.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, that's Nona Peltier with our business news. At least 31,000 people waited in the MIQ lottery line yesterday, but missed out for possibly a second time. Barry Smart is one of the lucky ones who nabbed a spot in MIQ yesterday. He travelled to Queensland in July when the Trans-Tasman bubble was open to visit a friend and do a road trip with his daughter, but got stuck there after the bubble closed. He's been trying to get home ever since. Paulina Lau spoke to Barry about how he feels now he's secured a place in isolation.
Very mixed feelings about the whole situation. I personally feel very lucky, but I feel very sorry for the people who are still pending, still waiting, and have got no idea when they're going to be able to return to New Zealand. I can't help the way I feel. I wish I could. I wish I could say, don't feel like that, Barry, What's wrong with you? Go on top of the world, This is great. You're going home. You've got 14 days in quarantine and you're going to be able to resume your life. Well, it's great for me. But what about the other poor buggers that are that are still stuck?
What number were you in the queue yesterday?
I was around about 3,600 the second time.
The lottery's been described as the lottery of human misery. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I think it's the most undignified process that you can imagine, to throw 20 or 30,000 people into a room and sort of more or less them hope like hell that I can manage to get in the first few thousand so that I can do what I need to do and get back to whatever. Some of the tales of stranded New Zealanders are horrific. But, I feel for those people who are stuck behind because it could so easily have been me. And if it had been me, I would be sitting here thinking, when do I get to go back to my home?
You've got 30,000 plus people in a queue waiting for 3,000 something spots. You've got Kiwis competing against Kiwis. What do you make of that?
I think it's terrible. I've lost the connection that I felt for New Zealand, to be honest. I feel dismayed at the way the government is treating us citizens just because they live overseas. I think it's disgraceful, personally. It's going to take me a while, I think, to get back and to sort of reconcile where I've been with where I am. It's definitely changed my perspective on being a New Zealander. I've done a bit of travelling. When I was in Abkhazia, and they went round the room at this big supper, and he was going round and saying where people were coming from, and he came to me and I said, Novo Zealand, New Zealand, and he waved his arms around, he pointed at me, Novo Zealand, and the whole place just erupted. I felt huge pride in being a New Zealander. Not any longer. That pride's gone. It's gone.
Well, Barry got lucky, but tens of thousands missed out, still unable to return to their country. Legal action is brewing by grounded Kiwis, which advocates for vast numbers of expats who want to get home but can't. With the demand for MIQ rooms massively outstripping supply, the right to return home is hugely constrained by the country's border policy. So how long can the government legally do that for? Otago University law professor Andrew Geddis joins me now. Kia ora, Andrew. When do restrictions effectively become a ban?
So under the Bill of Rights Act, people have a right to return to New Zealand. That's sort of written into our rights. Those rights can, however, be limited in ways that are so-called demonstrably justified if there's good enough reason. Now, obviously, the existence of COVID and the fact that we're pursuing an elimination strategy which, we can't have COVID in New Zealand under that strategy, means that we have to have very, very tight border controls. The question as to when those border controls tip over into being a basic ban on returning, well, it's not a formal ban. Everyone has a right to come back. You just need to place an MIQ. The problem is because MIQ is so restricted and limited, and because the way MIQ is being distributed is on this basic luck basis, there could be people out there who've been trying to get back for very considerable amounts of time who've been unable to do so, as opposed to some people who may on their very first try be able to get back in. And those sort of inequality, unfairness aspects are perhaps the Achilles heel in the way the process has been run.
Is there a time, though, Andrew, so 18 months, right? Mm-hmm. People would have anticipated that this was potentially a relatively short-term fix. We're now 18 months into this. So does the time frame for which this restriction has been applied have an expiration date to when it's no longer acceptable in law?
No, I mean, I can't say that, there is a absolute, period of time in which you must be allowed to get into the country, because it all depends on the reasons why we have the limits in place. And the reason we have the limits in place is there's a pandemic out there that's killing lots and lots of people, and if it gets into our country, it'll kill lots and lots of people in here. And that hasn't gone away. So the fundamental problem is still as great now as it was 18 months ago. The question is, are there any people out there who have been trying for 18 months continuously to get back to New Zealand and just haven't been able to do so? Now, if that's the case, then there's a problem because, the system should have been set up to allow them to, at some point, get priority to enter into the country. Versus is the problem that for 18 months we've had these restrictions, and because there just aren't enough places for everyone who wants to come back, there has to be some form of rationing, and that form of rationing is going to create some feelings of unfairness. Everyone thinks they've got a really good reason to get back, but there just aren't enough places to keep people in here, to let people in. And if we allow more people to come in under looser restrictions, we increase the risk of COVID getting into New Zealand and people die.
There seems to be significant discretion, right, in terms of allocation. There's emergency spots, there's some sports teams that are coming in, bulk groups go before a committee to see if they get a spot. Is there a legal obligation to be fair? Because one of the arguments could be that we're ranking people's citizenship, as in some citizens are more valuable to us than others.
So there's two questions. So the first question is, is an MIQ system or some form of MIQ system justifiable? And I think there's very, very strong arguments for why it is. Then the question is, how does the MIQ system actually work? So, what are the actual decisions that are made as to who gets priority, who gets brought in, who's allowed places? And those sorts of decisions, can be looked at and do have to be in themselves justifiable and rational and fair. And on that basis, there are perhaps some decisions that have been made under the MIQ process that may not pass that muster. Why was the English netball team allowed to come into New Zealand to play tests in front of 100 people and take up spots which New Zealand citizens who have a right to return to their country were rejected? So those sorts of decisions that have been made within the overall MIQ system, even if the MIQ system itself is justifiable, can be examined, can be challenged, and, if there's not good enough justification for them, then they're unlawful.
Given that there are a lot of areas in this that have, no absolutes, would it be helpful for someone to challenge it in court so that we can see where the boundaries are?
Yeah, if we're talking about what are the legal limits on what the government can do and how must the government act, ultimately the courts are the ones who get to decide that as a matter of law. Do need to be a little bit cautious. I imagine the courts in examining this would give the government quite a bit of discretion because, it's a lot of hard balancing between risk and benefit and so on. And a judge may well think, look, I don't know if I'm in the best position to make those calls. We've got elected politicians. We've got different models are being put up. Ultimately, voters will choose and decide who's got the best ideas. But for certain individuals, and we've already seen the case, the Bergen case, where she was rejected under emergency application. She brought a case to court, and miraculously, on the day the case was being heard, the government said, "Oh, we have a place for you." That shows that I don't think thought they were very strong grounds. So those sort of individual cases, can be brought and probably would be quite useful just to make sure someone's paying some attention to how these decisions are being made.
But aside from an individual challenge, Andrew, which I imagine relates to that individual specifically, is there any other fruitful ground to review the system more in its entirety?
Well, the Ombudsman is already looking at the case, at the system overall. And, of course, the Ombudsman doesn't just look at the strict legality. The Ombudsman also looks at the fairness and the reasonableness. So there's that avenue that's been pursued. In terms of going to court and trying to challenge the MIQ system as a whole, it's very difficult to do so for a couple of reasons. First of all, there is actually quite good reason for having the MIQ system. And secondly, the amount of evidence you would have to, get to show how the MIQ system is working in practice, what decisions have been made and so on, that would be very hard to collate. The government holds it all and, they're not being incredibly forthcoming in why some of their decisions have been made.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Otago University Law Professor Andrew Geddis. It is 9 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hei muriaki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, businesses form an orderly queue for the government's home isolation trial. A report by the government-appointed advisory panel into Oranga Tamariki is being described as weak and not going far enough to prompt transformational change that the Minister is promising to enforce. The report has found Oranga Tamariki is not fit for purpose and lacks vision and strategy. The Minister for Children has accepted all of its recommendations. But as our Māori News Director Mani Dunlop reports, advocates say it is a missed opportunity and they can't be certain transformation will happen as a result.
A bulldozer and foreseeing the change is how the Minister for Children, Calvin Davis, describes how he will aim to transform a broken system.
Look, to be honest, I'm going to be a bit of a bulldozer. We just have to actually force these changes through. The time for talk and the time for reviews and everything has ended, and it's now time to make these changes happen. And the board has given us a great pathway forward.
This is the sixth major report into Oranga Tamariki in the past 2 years, all of which have identified significant failings and have made sweeping recommendations. The advisory panel has 3 overarching recommendations, including a strategy to better partner with Māori, that the agency's purpose is clarified, and a governance board to oversee the changes. Changes, Mr Davis told me he is committed to. How will you make sure, say, in a year or 2 years' time, that if these recommendations and harm doesn't stop impacting whānau Māori at the hands of OT, will you step down if these aren't implemented and the change doesn't happen as a result of this report?
Well, this is a strategy that will take between 3 and 5 years. And things won't happen immediately, but we are heading in the right direction. We will, of course, be monitoring changes and improvements, but it's about staying the distance and making sure that what you start, you finish.
Changes that advocates and community leaders say should already be happening, with a plethora of reports telling the government to do so. Justice advocate and former Children's Commission Kaimahi, Julia Whaiporti, says it's a weak report and tinkering and putting more money into strategies is not the answer.
You cannot make essentially the perpetrator our carer anymore. I mean, I'm thinking about the whānau I've sat in front of, the mamas I've sat in front of, who are more afraid to call Oranga Tamariki when they need support than the fist of their partners they have to deal with every day. I'm thinking of the mama who had her baby taken off her before she had even birthed the placenta on the hospital bed. I'm thinking of the kids who've been placed in non-kin care when they had whānau willing and ready to take the kids because a junior social worker thought they needed to follow some paper trail first and foremost. So this isn't a system that we should be tinkering with. The calls have been really loud.
National Urban Māori Authority Chair Lady Tureiti Moxon has been a forceful advocate for the creation of a mokopuna authority and a Māori transition authority. She said this report and its recommendations are on the right track, but it is a missed opportunity to be bold.
Another report. It's telling us what we already know. It's telling us that more needs to be done, but it's a fix-up. And it's unfortunate because the kahurangi have been very involved in the discussions that have gone on and with the Minister and also with the Ministerial Advisory Group, and we've appreciated that. But I don't think it goes far enough.
Lady Tureiti says a body similar to the Māori Health Authority to sit alongside Oranga Tamariki could have been the answer and created immediate action. The outgoing Children's Commissioner, Judge Andrew Beecroft, welcomes the report and thinks it is significant in providing a roadmap for the government to implement the changes. But he also says it doesn't go far enough.
I would have preferred the report went further, but I'll tell you, 5 years ago, we would never have thought a government would have spoken in these terms. Acceptance of traumatic harm caused by a government agency, devolution of power and function, equitable sharing of resources.
Meanwhile, because of the range of reports and recommendations made to Oranga Tamariki over recent years, its acting chief executive, Chapi Te Kani, says changes are already underway and the agency has an action plan in place in response to this report.
An app aimed at stopping restaurant-quality food ending up in the bin has launched in Wellington today with the aim of reducing food heading to landfills. Kirsty Frame has more.
Foodprint is the new kid on the tech block, and it's on a mission to fight food waste. After launching the mobile app in Auckland last year, requests have flooded in for Wellington to be next, and today that wish came true. Foodprint's founder Michael Garvey says her app will help Wellingtonians reduce food waste and save money. She explains how it works.
Each day, eateries who have got food that they haven't sold or can't sell, they can list that on the app for a discount. The discounts start from 30% off, but sometimes can go all the way up to 90% off. As a customer, you can jump on the app and see what's available and then purchase within the app and run down to the eatery and collect that item.
The app was born out of Michael's keen interest in sustainability and practical experience in hospitality across the globe. The idea awarded her a spot in a climate-focused business program by Creative HQ, which allowed her to launch so quickly. She says food waste is a bigger issue than some might think.
Food waste is a real issue both socially and environmentally. There's some new research out that suggests it accounts for up to 10% of our global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's something that sort of should be totally avoidable at the same time.
Our food waste statistics are far from tasty. Each year, almost 24,000 tonnes of food is thrown out by cafes and restaurants around New Zealand. More than 60% of that is avoidable. When food gets thrown into a landfill, it can't decompose naturally and instead produces a greenhouse gas, methane. Wellington City Councillor Laurie Foon, who holds the waste minimisation portfolio, says the city's food waste is frightening.
Food and organic waste is the biggest quantity of waste that goes into our landfill every week. So at the moment, that weekly figure is 33%. So that's quite frightening, and that's 192 tonnes per week.
Councillor Foon says Footprint is filling a much-needed gap in Wellington's waste scene, but it's also playing a part in making more food available for more people. Michael Garvey says food availability is a serious issue for a sustainable future.
We've got a huge amount of people experiencing food insecurity both in Aotearoa and around the world. If we continue with our current rates of wasting food, we're not actually going to be able to feed the world's population in 2050.
More than 30 eateries have signed up to the app already. Helen Kono, who owns Yoshi Sushi and Bento with her husband Yoshi, says it was a no-brainer. She hopes the Foodprint app will help her restaurants sell out quicker so they can avoid waste altogether.
You never want to throw away food. There's also limitations on how long your food lasts. So, if you take it to a kitchen or something, it might not be great by the time it gets there. So it's having that instantaneous sales that really helps.
And she's already impressed with the uptake.
We had a really busy lunch rush. It was just dying down, so I thought I'll quickly pop some things on, and I think literally within a couple of minutes our first 2 sold, so that's great.
Already across the day, the app has seen dozens of discounted meals available to the people of Wellington. Michael Garvey hopes it's just the beginning.
Ahiahi Mārie, RNZ News at 6, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The government says it's still possible for Auckland to drop to alert level 2 next week, despite a large uptick in COVID-19 cases. There are 45 new community cases today, 33 are among household or known close contacts. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins has told Checkpoint the majority of cases are linked to other positive household contacts.
There can be some rule breaches, but sometimes there are legitimate reasons at even at level 3, for households to be in contact with one another. And so, I don't want to cast aspersions on these households unfairly.
Chris Hipkins says the government has previously relaxed restrictions progressively rather than moved alert levels overnight, and that could be the case next week. Cabinet will make that decision next Monday. The Police Minister says it is disappointing an inspector is under investigation for crossing the Auckland boundary, apparently without an exemption, to attend a burial. Auckland is currently at alert level 3 and restrictions relating to essential travel remain in place. Portal Williams says she has been briefed an officer is under investigation, possibly for helping people cross the boundary.
I think we should all do what we're supposed to do, police included. It's quite disappointing if this is the case, that there's been a breach.
The Independent Police Conduct Authority has also been notified, and a junior sailor is being investigated by the Navy after attending a family funeral in Hawke's Bay last weekend. Parliament's gone into urgency to debate legislation making a raft of changes as part of the COVID response. The Minister Chris Hipkins has told the House there were mainly common sense amendments needed due to the disruption caused by the outbreak. He singled out two of the more controversial as relating to tenancies. The first to help tenants stay in rental homes in future outbreaks, and the second to help solve commercial disputes. ACT leader David Seymour told Parliament making the latter retrospective is appalling law. The bill will pass its first reading today and will then be sent to Select Committee. Those leaving Tamaki Makaurau permanently say they're overjoyed to finally escape the region's lockdown. There's been a steady stream of cars packed to the brim through the southern border today. That's because moving house is now a valid reason to leave Auckland. Diane Martin, who's moving to Nelson, has told Checkpoint the loosening of the border restrictions is a huge relief.
Yeah, just seeing country and cows and, getting out of Auckland, I'm starting to feel good.
Relocating to tertiary accommodation, shared parenting arrangements and returning to a home in Alert Level 2 territory are also now allowed. The Children's Commissioner says recommendations to the Minister for Children to transform Oranga Tamariki is a good roadmap, but it could have been bolder. The government-appointed advisory panel has found Oranga Tamariki is not fit for purpose, and it lacks vision and strategy and has three overarching recommendations. The Children's Commissioner, Judge Andrew Beecroft, welcomes the report and thinks it is significant in providing a roadmap for the government to implement change. But he says it doesn't go far enough.
I would have preferred the report went further, but I'll tell you, 5 years ago, we would never have thought a government would have spoken in these terms. Acceptance of traumatic harm caused by a government agency, devolution of power and function, equitable sharing of resources.
The National Party says the government needs to ensure immigration has the resources to process residence visa applications. RNZ understands the government will announce tomorrow it is set to expedite thousands of applications. Migrants have faced lengthy delays for their residency paperwork to be processed. A now deleted page on Immigration New Zealand's website suggests the government is also creating a one-off residence visa for migrant workers. National's Erica Stanford says the government needs to ensure the agency is prepared to cope with the applications.
This one-off 2021 visa, you're probably going to get around about 100,000 applications hitting Immigration New Zealand's decks in the next few months. That is going to need significant resource. It's also going to need fast tracking as well.
Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy is expected to announce further details tomorrow. It's 6:04. Staff at a Central Otago business have been threatened over a free entry offer for vaccinated people during the school holidays. Highlands Motorsport Park in Cromwell is waiving the $30 entry fee to the museum for vaccinated people and their accompanying children during the school holidays. Chief Executive Jodie Spillin says everyone is welcome at the museum, but the vicious online abuse directed towards her and her staff over the offer is a shock. She says the offer is a way to thank those who have had the vaccine, and most people are supportive. Moving into sport news now, the three Auckland-based NPC rugby teams have been cleared to resume training in a restricted capacity. New Zealand Rugby has confirmed the Auckland, North Harbour and Counties Manukau squads will return to supervised fitness sessions. Groups are restricted to 10 people, while trainings must also be no more than an hour in duration, contactless and with no sharing of equipment allowed. All players and staff have been tested prior to returning. NZR says the teams will return to competition once Auckland moves down to Alert Level 2. Chances of Sunday's NRL Grand Final being moved to from Brisbane to Townsville have fallen after only one new community case of COVID-19 was announced in Queensland today. The emergence of 4 new cases in the state yesterday was forcing the NRL to prepare for a possible last-minute switch of location. However, news of just a single case today means the NRL is pushing ahead with the original venue of Suncorp Stadium for the decider between the Rabbitohs and the Panthers. The New Zealand women's basketball team's World Cup dreams hang by a thread after back-to-back losses at the Asia Cup in Jordan. The Tall Ferns were beaten 62-50 by Japan last night and must beat India tonight to have any chance of qualifying for next year's World Cup qualifiers. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Angela Barnett on mental health and body image. You've got to love the one you're in. Champions of the Pacific is back on the airwaves. This week, Tale Anderson and Vinnie Wiley follow the fortunes of the two Pacifica teams due to join the Super Rugby competition next year. And this week's Hump Prize is Mandy Haga's book, Protest Shaping Aotearoa. See if you can recognise the protesters from the sound bites on Nights after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, on air, online and on demand. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Pare Thursday. In the west from Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Peninsula and the central high country, fine spells and a few showers, then a period of rain spreading north tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast to Wellington, also Marlborough, will be mainly fine tonight with showers spreading north tomorrow. Nelson will also be fine, apart from isolated showers tonight and tomorrow afternoon. Bulla and Westland will see periods of rain, clearing tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, except for Clutha, will see showers spreading north this afternoon and evening, clearing to fine tomorrow. Clutha and Southland, as well as Fiordland, will see showers, snow to 500 metres tonight and early tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain and fine spells, southwest gales for a time this afternoon and evening. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Pare Thursday. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Sarah. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Businesses are lining up to be part of the government's home isolation trial that's due to get underway next month. 150 business people who will be charged $1,000 will stay in self-contained houses close to Auckland or Christchurch and submit to be tracked in some form for 14 days. Mark Ulrich is the director of UMC, an engineering company that sells wire fabrication machinery to the fencing industry around the world. His company is very keen to take part in the trial, and he joins me now. Kia ora, Mark. You've had a look at the criteria now. Do you reckon you can meet that?
Hello, Lisa. I believe we can. We're still waiting for a little bit more detail, as usual, around how it's all going to work. You say 150 business people, but that also includes, government ministers and their entourages as well. So across New Zealand, it will be interesting to see how many companies and people can actually get out and trial this program.
So in terms of the property, they say it has to be self-contained, a house and close to Auckland or Christchurch. Have you identified a property that you could and would use?
Yes, I have, but I believe there's a lot of options too. That will be the least of our problems, securing a property where we can actually stay in, or one of us or a number of us could self-isolate in. We're just sort of hopeful of getting chosen to be able to go.
What's your biggest challenge going to be, do you think?
In regard to...
You said you think the house is one of the easier parts of the equation. What do you think are the more difficult bits?
The more difficult bits is actually just getting chosen to get back. I mean, we've tried a number of times. A number of our staff have in the lottery system for MIQ. The first time I was 19,000 on the list, and last night I was 9,000 on the list, so I was getting closer to it. But, we just need some certainty about when we can get back. And this has been the issue for us the whole time, is we've got people who are willing to go for extended periods and do things like that. But we can't send people, we can't go ourselves if there's no option or no hope of actually, getting back into this country.
The COVID response minister, has said economic value of the business will be taken into consideration. What is your pitch to be part of this trial?
We are 100% export-based. We make bespoke machinery for the wire and steel industry worldwide, and we deal with the biggest players worldwide are our customers. They look to New Zealand. They've looked to us over the years to be innovative, to find ways to solve their problems, to help create value for them. And we've always been able to do that. And then at the moment, or for the last 18 months, unfortunately, they want us to come and visit, and they want us to help them. But we have to say, well, we can come, but we can't really because we can't get back.
So how badly has that affected your business, do you think?
Considerably. Look, we've done okay during this time. During COVID and just prior to COVID, food security was a major issue for a lot of countries worldwide. And, we play into that servicing the agricultural sector. So we were getting a lot of inquiry. We've developed, patented technology. We've got the best and the fastest machines that you can buy for what we do. And we need to be able to develop relationships further to get some of these people across the line. You can't have a Teams meeting or a Skype meeting with a guy in France who you've never met before, who's looking to spend millions of dollars on some equipment. He wants to be able to go and sit running. He wants to come and see our engineers, talk to us, or us go and visit him. And he knows that that's not possible, and we know that that's not possible. So that's the end of the conversation.
So, as you pointed out, 150 spots, some of those are going to be taken by government departments and ministers. What happens for you guys if you don't get on the trial?
Look, it's I don't know. Look, the hard thing for us is that we've got a dozen staff here in Christchurch and probably close to 50 businesses who supply goods and services to us. We generate millions of dollars a year in export earnings for this country, and we take living and working here in New Zealand, the good and the bad at the same time. But with no pathway forward, with no plan on how we're going to be able to get to these people, it makes it very difficult to do business here in New Zealand.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Mark Ulrich, who's the director of UMC, which is an engineering company, and it is pretty desperate to get on to this government home isolation trial. Now, just on the subject of MIQ, Managed Isolation and Quarantine, we've had a statement from the Chief Ombudsman, Judge Peter Boscher, and that reads in part, I remain concerned about the number of complaints I continue to receive in relation to the MIQ system. In mid-August, I said I was considering my options, including whether to carry out a broader independent review of the processes pertaining to managed isolation, allocation and MIQ. I appreciate that time is of the essence and many people seeking to return to New Zealand are in very stressful situations. Judge Boscher goes on to say, I expect to be in a position to say more about my plans shortly. In the meantime, he continues to talk to the Ministry of Innovation, Business and Employment. He also notes that since he made statements publicly on the 17th of August about complaints regarding MIQ, he has received more than 100 more MIQ and border-related complaints, in addition to approximately 700 that he has received since July 2020. And he says it is clear that returnees are frustrated and upset about aspects of the MIQ system. So just to reiterate there, Judge Peter Boscher saying expects soon to be in a position to say more about what his plans are in terms of investigating or not the MIQ system. The National Party wants to open up the country with a plan it says will allow Kiwis to return home for Christmas. The party has released a 3-step plan to open the borders and stop future lockdowns, which it says will clear the MIQ backlog, keep COVID cases to a minimum and make it easier for people to travel to and from New Zealand. Political reporter Charlie Drever has more.
National's Judith Collins making a bold promise at today's policy launch.
National's plan means Kiwis overseas could come home to spend this Christmas with loved ones or take an overseas holiday for New Year's.
National says it will do this by supercharging the vaccine rollout, by vaccinating in schools, at hospitality areas, managed isolation, along with increasing resourcing for Māori health providers and going door to door in vulnerable communities. Once at least 85% of the eligible population is vaccinated, the party wants to open up the border using a traffic light system.
If you're coming from a green zone country and are fully vaccinated, you can travel freely into New Zealand. You simply complete a test before leaving and a rapid COVID test at the airport on arrival. Orange Travel will recognise that double vaccinated travellers pose less risk but still require 1 week home isolation and use of an app to check in daily. Red Zone Travel will be recognisable as a system that everyone is sent through today.
Unvaccinated non-citizens and non-permanent residents would be banned from travelling to New Zealand. The party says it will move away from a strategy of elimination to vigorous suppression through widespread rapid testing and increasing ICU and contact tracing capacity. But the Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson is calling National's policy rushed and dangerous.
No numbers about what that means for hospitalisations or for deaths, Mr Speaker, but we can help them here because they said they based their plan on the United Kingdom. Well, if we compare that using a per head of population measure, that would mean, for example, 16,000 cases a week, 460 hospitalisations a week, 54 deaths a week.
Today, the government supplied details of some of its first steps to open up the border. A pilot program allowing 150 people travelling for business to self-isolate at home. A move that's been scoffed at by National's Chris Bishop.
It's pathetic. Is this really what we've come to as a country? Plus running a lottery in human misery every week to see who gets the privilege of entering New Zealand through MIQ. It's like the Hunger Games, except it's not fictional. It's Kiwi citizens' lives we're talking about.
But COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says National's rush to open the border would not end well.
The biggest promise they're making at the moment is that they're willing for Kiwis to get COVID for Christmas.
And Te Pāti Māori's Rawiri Waititi is worried that Māori would be the ones left paying the price.
Now, we've been constantly saying that it must be 90% vaccination. Māori must be the benchmark for that. If we do not, they are committing our people to an early death. And so we haven't had equitable resourcing in terms of vaccination. We haven't had equitable information sharing. If you're not at the table making those decisions, you're on the menu.
This plan, of course, like the government's, depends on vaccination rates, which as of late has been dropping off, meaning the pressure is on to get needles in arms to make sure Delta isn't given the chance to be the Grinch that steals Christmas.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Aucklanders are still largely locked off from the rest of the country and an epidemiologist wants it to stay that way unless vaccination rates rise. Professor Rod Jackson wants hard rules put on the super cities border. No jab, no travel. It's an idea that's getting mixed reviews. Katie Doyle reports.
The hum of a construction site, a reminder of Auckland before Delta. Queen Street's humming too, people desperate to get out and about after the lengthy stint in lockdown. But with movement comes risk, and if Professor Rod Jackson has his way, people won't be going anywhere unless they've had their shots.
I think we need to get tough. I think we need vaccine certificates. I don't think you should be allowed on a plane without a vaccine certificate. I don't think you should be allowed into a nightclub. I think you shouldn't be allowed into the country without being double vaccinated. Essential workers leaving Auckland. I don't think anyone should be allowed to leave the Auckland border without being double vaccinated.
Aucklanders unable to leave the supercity unless they've had both doses of the vaccine. So what do they make of that idea?
Yeah, I think it's safer for us to be double vaccinated before we start moving in.
Yeah, sure, definitely. We needed to back to the normal.
And vaccinations, in your view, the way to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not really up to me. I don't really travel out of Auckland anyway, but I mean, it seems like a good idea safety-wise, but I don't know.
In Wellington, people aren't sure.
I don't think they need to be double vaccinated. I'm not sure if there's any proof on that, but I'm definitely pro-vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what they're coming down for, I suppose, but I think depending on the circumstances, that's fair.
I don't think it is. I mean, myself, I've only had one vaccination and I've got and that took a long time to book. And I've got to wait the 6 weeks' time to have my second vaccination because that's what I'm told to do. So if I was in Auckland and I'd had one vaccination and I had to wait an extensive period of time to get my second vaccination through no fault of my own, then I don't think it would be very fair.
But what are the legal implications? Can the government put these restrictions in place? University of Otago law professor Andrew Geddis explains.
The orders the government is using to combat COVID cannot be used in a way that is against the Bill of Rights Act. So under the Bill of Rights Act, there would have to be a very careful balancing between the threat that non-vaccinated people pose of spreading COVID against the rights that everyone has to move around the country freely as they wish.
Professor Geddis says consideration would also need to be given to the small number of people who can't get vaccinated due to medical conditions. He says they shouldn't be prevented from engaging in everyday life.
If we set up a vaccination system that says to those people, sorry, you're going to be locked out of society, that cannot be justified in Bill of Rights Act terms.
Professor Geddis says there would have to be some way of carving out exemptions for that group.
The number of people living with dementia in New Zealand will double in the next 30 years, according to a new report from the University of Auckland. It's estimated more than 167,000 people will have it by 2050, and it'll cost $6 billion to manage the disease. But while the number for Pākehā is expected to double, for Māori, Pacific and Asian people, it's expected to triple. Alzheimer's New Zealand commissioned the report and says the country isn't prepared. Paulina Lau has been speaking to CEO Catherine Hall about why these numbers are increasing.
The biggest risk factor for dementia is age, and New Zealand has an ageing population, and so that's the reason why we're seeing such a big increase happening now and forecast to increase rapidly over the next generation or so.
The numbers for Europeans are set to double, but for Māori, Pacifica and Asian people, it'll triple. Why is that?
For Maori, Pacific and Asian populations, the numbers of people living with dementia are going to triple because those populations are ageing at a faster rate than the general population. But what we do know is that dementia is also linked to our state of well-being. So the rates of heart disease and obesity and diabetes and hearing loss in New Zealand do affect the prevalence of dementia.
What's the impact of these rising numbers on the healthcare system?
Well, look, it's really significant. If we can just put it into context, I think over the past 4 years, the increase in the numbers of people living with dementia has been about 7,000. But we're expecting over the next 10 years for the numbers to increase by 30,000 and then for the numbers to increase by 100,000 by 2050. So that's a really big increase. And at the moment, the services are woefully inadequate, and we are just not ready for an increase of that size and scale.
Why isn't the country prepared for this?
The country hasn't done anything to prepare for this. What we really desperately need is an action plan for the health system to prepare for all of this. And Alzheimer's New Zealand and our colleagues in the dementia sector, we have written an action plan which is based on best practice and research, and we've presented that to government as a blueprint for their action. And implementing that plan, funding it and implementing it would make a huge difference to our ability to provide the help and support that all of these people are going to desperately need.
What are some of the top priorities in that plan that's been laid out?
I think that right at the beginning is providing much better support for people who are living with dementia now. So that's people living in the community in particular, and also care partners so that they can have a break. But we also know that good quality national health promotion activities could have a big impact on the number of people living with dementia. It could reduce the number of people by 10 or even 20%. We also are going to have a lot of people living with dementia in our community, so more inclusive and accepting or dementia-friendly communities would make a big difference too.
Pacific organisations are taking to the airwaves to try to address mental health concerns in the Pacifica community. A new weekly radio segment that was also run online launched today with the hope it can help people struggling with things like the stress and effects of lockdown. Sarah Jane Hopgood reports.
Ngalo whānefo is a Tongan metaphor meaning when life gets difficult and stormy seas get rough, we need support to ride those waves and gently make it back to shore. And that's the name of a new weekly radio segment on Radio 531 PI, which aims to normalise conversations about mental health well-being. Launched as part of the Mental Health Awareness Week, listeners will hear from Pacific psychologists, psychiatrists and clinical specialists. Pacific psychiatrist Dr. Siale Foliaki says they want to make information and advice about mental health more accessible to Pasifika people.
There is a wealth of research that says that for the Pacific community in particular, accessing mental health services is particularly problematic. And so, for whatever reasons, it's harder for a Pacific person to get the care that they need if there's a significant mental health issue. And the other side of that same coin is that often people present in primary care with stress-related illness.
Dr. Foliaki says explaining the effects of stress will hopefully help Pacific people articulate what they're going through when they seek medical help.
There are times when we're stressed, you get an increase in, things like migraine, high blood pressure, gastric ulcers, abdominal pain. A lot of those physical morbidities often are associated with unresolved stress going on and sometimes associated with high levels of anxiety and depression. Pacific people going into the primary care setting, and those questions not asked of them.
Another important topic that will be discussed in these weekly segments are the mental health and well-being issues Pasifika people are facing with COVID-19 and lockdown. Psychiatry Registrar Dr. Chris Massell says the team of Pacific mental health professionals will offer advice, management techniques and cues to look out for to see if someone needs additional help.
And that includes sort of day-to-day stresses that we're having, sort of frustrations that our families are feeling, anxieties and worries that we may have, ways that we can manage and deal with that, how we can broach the conversations, those hard conversations that, we need to have with our families.
Dr. Sell says having this segment available on air and online via Radio 531PI's Facebook page will help the Pasifika community learn more about their mental health and well-being.
The saying goes that there's no health without mental health, so I guess making it a priority alongside the physical health is going to push our communities forward in terms of our overall health and well-being.
Radio 531PI host Brian Zangala is excited to facilitate the discussions on his show Pacific Days. Mr. Zangala says it's a much-needed topic for the community.
I think it's a great initiative to enable our Pasifika to open up and to talk about mental health in a safe space, and it's great that we're going to be having professionals to be able to open up this space more.
Mr. Sangala encourages the Pasifika audience to engage with the conversations during the segment to get the most out of the medical professionals.
It's going to be streamed online through our Facebook page, so we'll take questions from online. But if people call through, I'll put them through as well.
The mental health segment will be 20 to 30 minutes long and aims to connect with the Pacific community more intimately as a means of understanding their needs.
Before we go, your feedback, mixed reviews for National's plans to open up Aotearoa to the world. We spoke to Chris Bishop. This person says National's plan is a plandemic, flimsy with gaping holes. That from Leah. Whereas this listener says, wow, Chris Bishop actually answers your questions. Let's do it, they say. That's about all we've got time for. The late news team will keep you updated throughout the night. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. And from 5 a.m. tomorrow, first up, just what access will 2 jabs get you? First up looks at how far vaccine passports will fly in New Zealand. So tune in from 5 a.m. Kia pai tōpō. Have a great night.
Kia ora tātou. RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The COVID-19 response minister says it's possible